I am one of the highest jumpers in the world, but I started probably in a similar spot where you were at. When I was 16, I couldn't dunk, my jump technique sucked, I was really weak, and I didn't know anything about jump training. Despite that, over the next couple of years, I added over 10 inches to my vertical. And then it stopped. In fact, it stopped improving multiple times. I got stuck at 42 inches for an entire year in 2017. I got stuck at 46 inches in 2019 for another year. And then I was stuck at 48 for 2 years before I finally broke through and got that coveted 50-inch vertical jump. And when I say stuck, I mean I was doing an entire training cycle for a month. I would test my vertical and it would not budge. Sometimes it would even go down. And I was testing frequently. And in today's video, I'm gonna give you the exact system I used to break through each one of those plateaus. If you use the methods that I describe in this video, you're gonna save both time and lots of pain, both mental and physical. And that is a guarantee. First, we have to define what a plateau is. And it's a period of time where you're not making progress. If you look at a picture of a plateau, there is a big steep hill and then it's just flat. And that flat line represents your progress. A plateau, however, is dictated by the period of time that you're looking at. In the short term, you might be plateaued, but when you zoom out, you've actually made a lot of progress. For example, during that first plateau where I was stuck at 46 inches for an entire year, if you zoom out and you look at a 2-year window, I actually improved quite a bit. So what period of time should you look at to decide if you're actually in a plateau? First, we have to look at your training age. Your training age is basically how many jumps you've taken in your life and how long you've been lifting weights for. If your training age is low, 1 month is enough to decide if you're in a plateau or not. So if you've literally never jumped, you've never lifted weights, you can look at your progress at the end of every month. And if you ever get stuck, if you don't improve month to month, it might be worth looking at your training and trying to change something. If you have a medium training age, so you've been training for 1 to 2 years, 1 macro cycle is enough to know if you're in the middle of a plateau or not. And a macro cycle typically is anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And if you have a high training age, so you've been specifically jump training for 3 years or more, I like to look at progress year to year. So assuming you're healthy, if you compare your progress today to the exact day last year, did you get better? Are you stagnant or did you get worse? If you haven't improved, then it's safe to say you're in a plateau. However, if you have a medium training age or a high training age and you're comparing your progress right now to 4 weeks ago, there's no point. And I used to do this a lot. I used to attribute how I'm jumping based on the last couple of weeks of training, but how you're jumping now is a result of the last few months of training. And in the short term, as an athlete that has a medium or high training age, there are so many variables that can affect your progress that there's no point. However, looking at a 6 to 12 month span is enough to cause big adaptations in your body that should cause you to jump higher. Now, let's say that you have confirmed you are in a plateau. What do you do now? We have to use science to break through that plateau. But what is science? Science is anything that contains the scientific method. And they might have taught you this in school. Maybe you were sleeping, but I'm gonna reteach it to you right now because it's very, very important. And I apply it to every area of my life, including jumping, especially jumping. The scientific method consists of 5 things. You got observation. So you notice something, you see something in nature that's happening. 2, that leads to you asking a question. For example, you see that it rained, and then you're like, why is it raining? That's your question. 3, you formulate a hypothesis, which is your guess on why the thing is happening. So I might see it's raining, I ask myself, why is it raining? And then my hypothesis is because the clouds get really filled with water until they burst and then the rain comes down. That might not be what's actually happening, but it's my hypothesis on what is happening. 4 is where things get fun, it's the experiment. So now you decide you're gonna run a test to test out your guess on why the thing is happening. So I could go climb a mountain where there's clouds, bring a device that measures how much water is in the clouds and then measure it. And ideally, it's a good enough experiment that answers your question and confirms your hypothesis or proves you wrong. And then 5 is data collection and analysis. So you write down what happened and you look at the data and you see if it was a good experiment, was it accurate, did it answer your question correctly or not, do you need to run a different experiment, etc., etc. Now, this is very important. You want to run the experiment in a way that's repeatable so that other people can run the same test. To do this, you have to keep your methods the same. Your methods is basically a list where you write down exactly how you ran the test so that other people can copy it. Now, why is this relevant? Why am I teaching you about science? Jump training is the scientific method. Your training, the workouts you're using, how you're periodizing them, that is the experiment. Your performance, how you jump at the end of a training cycle, is the result. And these results give us data. Whether you jump higher or you jump lower, it's all data. And this, I've had to spend a lot of years, a lot of trial and error to learn this. And it's to separate yourself emotionally from the result and just see it as data. If I do a training cycle and I jump lower, I don't attach an emotion to it. I don't think it's good or bad. I just see it as data. I did X, I performed Y, and Z is I'm gonna now do this other thing based on what happened. Now, when you are judging to see if you're in a plateau, remember, a good experiment has to be repeatable, not just by other scientists or athletes, but repeatable by you. So when you do your test, right, when you test your vertical at the end of a training cycle, you have to keep conditions the same to see if you're in a plateau. I train thousands of athletes, and one of the most common things that they come to me with are, Isaiah, I trained super hard for 3 months and then I tested my vertical and I jumped lower, what happened? But then when I look at where they tested their vertical, it was at 8 in the morning in a dead gym in the middle of winter when it was cold as hell inside that gym. And then 3 months ago, when they tested their vertical, was right after a basketball game at 8 p.m. They were sweating, they had adrenaline flowing, and they jumped their highest ever. Those are two completely different experiments, two completely different tests. They should not be compared to each other. So if you're gonna test your vertical, you should compare the same environments, right? So you can have a PR for 8 a.m. in the middle of a training cycle, and then you can have a PR when conditions are perfect, when there's adrenaline, competitive environment, and you're feeling good. Too many times, I've tested my vertical and thought I got worse. But in reality, I just wasn't in a good enough environment. I was actually a better organism. I was more capable, I was stronger, I was faster. My outputs were way higher, I was more explosive, but I wasn't in an environment where I could actualize that vertical. And that's where I am right now. This last year, I've tested 50 multiple times. However, I haven't broke my PR of 50.5. But the year I got 50.5 for the first time, I did it one time. And then the highest I ever tested before or after that in that year was 49. It's just that me being a better organism now, I haven't been put in an environment where I can actualize that performance. So I wouldn't look at my training and think it's not working, right? All the metrics are climbing up, getting faster, my power clean's going up, my squat's going up. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a plateau because I'm technically jumping higher when I keep the test the same. I've never tested 50 in a dead gym multiple times until this year. Another huge variable, and arguably the most important variable to keep the same, is your health. If you get hurt, don't judge those next few months of training as not working. Injuries can be a huge, huge setback. And a lot of the time spent after an injury is just going back to your baseline level. So again, I'll give an example for myself. In 2022, I tested 50.5 with a 0.97 flight time. 2023, I tear my IT band. I'm out for like 3 months. I get back to finally jumping left, right, 6 months in. Then I trained for another 6 months. At the end of that year, 1 year post tearing my IT band, I test 50.5 again. Typically, somebody would think I was plateaued for a year if you don't account for the injury that happened, right? So I would actually say that the training was really good during that year. Which, by the way, guys, I want to take this moment to tell you that this stuff is really hard to wrap your head around. You have to manage injuries, managing plateaus, managing the psychology of not knowing what to do next. And sometimes you need a third party to look at your training and tell you what it is that you need to do next to keep you motivated when you are plateaued because you tested your vertical at 8 in the morning and you don't have any friends to train with. And luckily for you, THP can do all of that and more for you. We've trained thousands of athletes to jump higher, and we're so confident in helping you jump higher that we have a guarantee. If you don't improve at least 3 inches in 6 months, we'll train you for free until you do. And if you're still wary of signing up, right now you can try your first month for 90% off. That means if you spend $12 right now, you'll have access to some of the best jump training in the world and possibly get results like this guy, who improved his vertical by a few inches in that first month after having spent $12. Or this guy, who got rid of knee pain and improved his vertical in that first month after having spent $12. So take advantage of that deal right now. Go to THPstrength.com. All right, so it's been an entire macro cycle. You kept conditions the same and your vertical didn't improve. You stayed healthy during that entire macro cycle. What now? To answer that question, this golden question, you need to know how vertical jump progress occurs through 2 models. 1 is the theory of adaptation, and 2 is the fitness fatigue model. And then finally, you have to understand the basics of long conjugate sequence systems, which is a type of periodization that helps put all of this stuff together and avoid plateaus and keep you jumping higher over and over and over and over again until you get bored of jump training and decide to quit, which is never, because you love jumping, right? Right? All right, theory of adaptation. Adaptation is a fancy word for a change, and it's a change that happens to an organism when it's placed in an environment it's not used to. For example, I live in Florida, and Florida is hot as and it's very humid. When you walk outside, it feels like you're in a swimming pool, a very hot, warm swimming pool. In order to adapt my body to this, my brain goes, whoa, it's hot, we need to cool this dude down. And over time, your body starts sweating earlier and earlier in higher amounts. That is an adaptation so that I don't pass out in the heat. The whole reason your body adapts is to keep you alive. Now, your body doesn't understand the difference between surviving in the heat or cold or fighting a tiger or lifting weights or training and jumping. Your body just understands stress. The tissues in your body are highly stressed, so it needs to cause changes so it can survive those stressors. And we can essentially trick our body into adapting in specific ways that cause you to jump higher. And the specific adaptation that we're going for and producing as much force as possible in about 0.2-ish to 0.3-ish seconds. What changes need to happen in your body for this to happen? I'll just list a few. You need bigger and stronger type 2 muscle fibers, making your type 1 fibers act more like type 2 fibers. Less inhibition from your Golgi tendon organ, which is essentially a governor. It's like a central governor in a car, right? My Durango that I used to have used to be limited at 118 miles an hour. Don't ask me how I know that. However, you can tune the car so it removes the governor and then you can go as fast as you want. And that's essentially what the Golgi tendon does with more advanced athletes. It becomes less active and allows you to rev up the engine of your body. We need more violent stretch reflexes from your muscle spindles. That way your muscle contracts harder after it's stretched. You need stiffer tendons that store more energy when stretched and more resilient tendons that don't break when they are stretched. We need faster and stronger signals from your nervous system because your brain innervates your muscles through neurons. And the faster they can get those signals down to your muscles, the more quickly and stronger your muscles can fire, helps you produce more force in that short amount of time that we need. We need better movement efficiency, right? Your jump technique needs to improve so that you can express all that newfound force that you can produce now and turn it into a high jump. You need denser bones so that they don't snap when you're producing a ton of force. And to induce all these changes, these adaptations in your body, we need to set up your environment through the way of training in a way that these changes happen. And to do this, we have to follow the 5 laws of adaptation. If you follow these 5 laws, changes will happen in your body and you will jump higher. Guaranteed. 1 is the law of progressive overload. Things need to get harder over time. For jumps, you need to drop from greater heights, you need to move with greater speed, you need to jump with more momentum coming into the jump, you need to try harder, and the overall forces you experience need to increase as you do plyometrics, max approach jumps, and sprints. In the weight room, the weights need to get heavier over time. You need to do more reps, or you need to do more reps with the same weight, or add sets, or less reps and way more weight. Second is the law of accommodation. What this law states is that an organism will eventually stop adapting to its environment. It is a waste of your body's resources to keep adapting. So it only adapts up until a point where you can stay alive, and then there's no reason to keep adapting. This is just a fancy way to describe the law of diminishing returns, aka the plateau, right? Improve, and then you stop. You don't need to jump higher after a certain point because that's a very high stressor on your body. So we need to trick the body into thinking, oh, this dude needs to make these changes to his body, but we're just tricking it, right? We just want to jump higher. We don't care about surviving. We're just trying to jump. And a really good way around this law of accommodation, diminishing returns, is variety. So instead of squatting 3 days a week, after doing that for a few months, try front squats, try single leg work. Instead of deadlifting all the time, play around with power cleans, clean pulls. Try different types of plyometrics. List is endless and it's basically just limited by your imagination. 4th is the law of specificity. If you want to get better at something, do more of the thing. If you want to get better at shooting, you got to shoot more jump shots. If you want to get better at dunking, dunk more. If you want to get better at squatting, squat. The more similar a movement is to the thing you're trying to improve, the more transfer it's going to have. And there's different ways that things can be specific. Range of motion, joint angles, muscles that are used, how much force is being produced, how long the movement takes, ground contact times. And we can use all these variables to create different exercises that'll have transfer while implementing variety into your training. And then finally, we have the law of individuality. Different people are going to respond differently to different exercises. You can have 2 athletes that start with the same vertical, the same level of strength, and they do the exact same workout. Let's say it's 3 sets of 5 squats 3 days a week, and then test their vertical at the end of each week. Every other variable the same. They eat the same, they sleep the same, they have no external stressors, but person A might improve way more than person B. So if you are plateaued, you want to look at each of those 5 laws and ask yourself, did I apply each of those in my training? And my favorite way to check all those boxes is with long conjugate sequence systems, type of periodization. And that's just a fancy way of saying we focus on multiple qualities at once. That way you don't detrain them too much. Example of some qualities can be the sporting skill you're trying to get better at. For example, if you're a basketball player, you want to keep playing basketball. Strength, speed, aerobic capacity, rate of force development, huge list of things. However, we put extra emphasis on one of those qualities and less emphasis on the other one. Then after you do 3 to 5 weeks of training, then you change the emphasis to a different variable. All while manipulating intensity and volume. Think of intensity as how hard something is. In terms of weightlifting, it can be the percentage of your max that you're doing. In terms of plateaus, it's usually dictated by intent, force, and speed, and joint angles. And we want to make sure there's an inverse relationship between both. So at the beginning of a training cycle, you want high volume, low intensity, and then it flips by the end of the cycle. This allows you to stay healthy, build up your work capacity and how resilient you are, and then get more out of the more intense stuff later on. And then during the last week of that training cycle, you unload. And that's where your performance shines through. Which brings me to the last model, which is the fitness fatigue model, which looks like this. The fitness fatigue model consists of 3 variables: fitness, fatigue, and performance. And as you can see here, as you train, your fitness levels go up. Fitness being your potential to lift heavy weights, run fast, and jump high. However, as you train, your fatigue also increases, which causes a decrease in performance. They are inversely correlated, performance and fatigue. But when you unload, you can see your fatigue drops off, fitness starts dropping off a little bit as well, but your performance spikes up. What does this mean for you? If you deloaded and you checked off all 5 of the boxes for the laws of adaptation, and then you unloaded and you still jumped poorly and conditions are perfect and you weren't hurt, then you might just be fatigued. And at that point, you might need a taper, which is a fancy way of saying a longer deload. This is what currently was happening to me. I've been backing off of training. Mind you, I've been training for years. And this last year, I trained really, really hard all year. And I've been spending now 6 to 8 weeks pretty easy training, and I'm just jumping higher week after week after week after week because I built up so much fatigue and my fitness levels were so high. However, the dangerous part is if you taper for too long, eventually your fitness is gonna lower so much that your performance also starts dropping off. And at that point, you have to introduce loads back into your training, get that fitness back up, and start the process all over again. If you found any of this helpful, like the video. Catch you guys next time. Peace out. Also a reminder, go to THPstrength.com, 90% off your first month of training.